Next question will first be addressed to Congressman Davis. Earlier this week, President Obama voiced criticism over the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. As governor, what will you do to extend the rights of gay and lesbian individuals and couples? In particular, do you support the right of gay and lesbian couples to marry? And do you support the expansion of hate crimes to include violence committed against gays and lesbians? Congressman Davis.
Let me be very candid with you. Every human being is entitled to respect and dignity. Don't you agree? Now, we ought to make that moral commitment. Here's what we have to do. We have to translate it into public policy. I happen not to be for marriage of a same-sex nature. I'm opposed to that. You may disagree with me. That happens to be, frankly, what I was taught in Montgomery, Alabama by my mother and grandmother, and I've not walked away from that, to be candid with you. As far as hate crimes go, we have to work our way through this. Let's understand the baseline. Of course, if you commit an act of violence against one of God's children, you ought to be punished for that. That's the law right now. The question is whether there should be extra punishments if you inflict violence on some groups of people. I wrestled with the issue in the Congress, to be candid with you. I wrestled with it for a very simple reason. I am not comfortable with the idea of the Federal Criminal Code drawing distinctions and saying, if you hurt this group of people, it's a little bit more meaningful than if you hurt this group of people. Because let me tell you how that plays out in practice. Let's say you have a hate crime statute that includes African Americans, individuals of color, women, and our gay and lesbian friends. Then the soldiers come along, and the veterans come along, and the senior citizens come along. And they say, what if there's an act of violence based on the uniform that I wore last night? What if there's an act of violence based on the fact that I'm an older person? How do we decide? How do we make that distinction? If the Alabama legislature passes a hate crime statute, I'm not going to spend a precious veto on stopping that. But I would suggest to the legislature that they include soldiers and senior citizens. This is the best way to look at this issue. Wise man once said, when you're examining questions of morality and questions of coexistence, you ask, what would Jesus do? I don't profess to know the answer to that. But I think that he would tell us that we all see through a glass darkly and know only in part. Then we shall see clearly, face to face, and shall know even as we are known. Let's have no illusions that we have all the answers. And final thing out of my mouth, if we could just compete, ladies and gentlemen, in a room full of over-the-mountain Democrats, how easy these questions would be. We got to get some votes from folks who are going to vote for Roy Moore in the Republican primary. And I'm not saying we bend who we are and what we are to accommodate those folks, but I want them to know the Democratic Party has a home for all kinds of people. Absolutely gays and lesbians, but some very conservative people as well. I want to build one party that spans from left to right, because that's what we will need if we're serious about winning in November 2010.
Commissioner Stark. I've got to just back up, okay? First of all, I wouldn't have voted against the hate crime bill. That's pretty much takes care of that. And as I sit up here and I look out over this audience, or as I go through Alabama, who am I to judge the people of Alabama? Who am I to tell you what your preference or what your preference shouldn't be? Or who am I to tell you the law shouldn't fit you as well as it should fit everybody? You know, I grew up in a little town in Fort Payne, Alabama. And I just happened to go by the other day, and my grandmother raised me. She's 100 years old. I went by and looked at her, and she was laying in bed, and I shook her on the shoulder, and she looked up, and she said, "Oh, you're the next governor." I said, "I hope so, grandmother." She said, "I know you're going to be, because I pray for you." My grandmother took me by the hand many, many days and walked me to Mount Carmel Baptist Church. You know, I don't go out. I can't support same-sex marriages. But at the same time, I'm not going to judge the people of Alabama. I'm not going to mistreat nobody, regardless of what color you are. regardless of what preference or where you want to go or who you want to live with. That's your business. But my personal preference or my belief is that marriage is between a man and a woman. And how you want to live from that point is your business. Any rebuttal comments?
I agree with that, and I recognize everyone in the room may not agree with that or share that opinion. But it's what I was taught, and I haven't moved away from it, as I've said earlier. This is the challenge on this issue and some other issues like abortion. We've got to figure out how to coexist with people who may think differently from each other on issues. I want to build a governing coalition that can change Alabama. So yes, if you want to know what my priorities would be as governor, fixing our economy and fixing our school system and getting us a new constitution, I think I can sell that to Alabamians. I think we can build a consensus around that. We're going to continue to shift and change as a society on the so-called moral social questions. What we have to do is believe in respect and dignity. And what we have to do is to create a politics where we're not tearing each other down, but respecting each other.
Well, I can tell you this, I'll spend more time on educating our children in Alabama than I will that piece of legislation. I can promise you that. And I'll spend more time trying to bring jobs to Alabama. That's what I'm going to do with the governor to say about it. I just wanted to make sure y'all didn't think you were just going to get easy questions.